as a parent, I know that if I find out there's something wrong with my child, I try to get as much information as I can, and oftentimes I try to find parents who've had children with a similar diagnosis as my child. And yet, for some reason, parents of transgender children or children who have gender dysphoria generally are very adamant about talking to someone like me who actually was a trans child. Rather than coming to me for advice or coming to experts who have worked with gender dysphoric children, instead they're following transgender activists' advice. And I find this incredibly confusing. As someone who had gender dysphoria, I have a wealth of information and compassion, and can really help those parents navigate through having a child with gender dysphoria and put them on a path towards healing, and most likely either resolving or managing that gender dysphoria so that when they grow up, they're not riddled with constant feelings of being born in the wrong body for their whole life. And yet these parents, at least the ones that I've interacted with, would rather force their child to be gender dysphoric, accept that they were born in the wrong body, and embrace the identity as a transgender child, rather than trying to resolve that. And it's very confusing to me, because in all honesty, it makes no sense. And it's not just me. What happens when someone says, hey, I know about this, I was a trans child, or I was a trans teen, or I actually started medically transitioning and then stopped. Instead of listening to us, they say things like, oh, you were never really trans, because if you were, you wouldn't have detransitioned. Or they say, you've internalized transphobia, and therefore I'm not going to talk to you because your self-hatred is somehow blemishing your view of this issue. Or they say, oh, you were just a trender. You were just someone who was pretending to be trans to get attention. Well, in my case, that's not true, because transgender wasn't even a word when I was a kid. It was called gender identity disorder, and then it changed to gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia. And so I'm not a trans trender. I've never thought of myself as having internalized transphobia because I've resolved my feelings of gender dysphoria for the most part. And I don't think that anybody can say that I never really was transgender, because based on how the trans activists define transgender, I was most definitely a trans child. I was consistent, persistent, and insistent that I was born in the wrong body, so much so that my teacher called in the school psychologist for an evaluation. Now that happened a long time ago, and it was a time when school psychologists weren't called in very often. So the fact that my gender dysphoria was so intense and so concerning to my teacher that she called in the school psychologist means that I was insistent, persistent, and consistent. So the fact that parents of kids who have gender dysphoria and trans activists are telling parents not to listen to someone like me, not to listen to someone like Walt Heyer, who actually went through a medical transition and then realized it was a mistake, not listening to the Pique resilience ladies who actually, most of them started on testosterone and then realized it was a mistake. When you have transgender activists telling parents, don't listen to people who have been there, don't listen to people who were trans as kids, or parents who had transgender child, don't listen to them because they don't know anything, listen to us. To me, that indicates they have an agenda. This isn't about the children. This isn't about the children's well-being. This is an agenda that the transgender activists have, and it makes me mad. Because the fact is that putting a child on puberty blockers actually prevents puberty from happening, and puberty is the thing that often resolves gender dysphoria in children. So, transgender activists are telling parents to do something that's going to prevent their children from resolving their gender dysphoria, and most likely cause them to become dysfunctional in their body as well as mentally, when gender dysphoria is something that can be treated much like anorexia. So parents of kids who have gender dysphoria, please start listening to those of us who've been there, who have experience, who know what it's like to be a trans kid, who know what it's like to get put on the path towards resolving that and managing feelings of gender dysphoria if it arises in adulthood. Talk to us. We are a great resource. We can help. We can help so that your child doesn't have to render their functional body dysfunctional. We can help so that your child doesn't think that they were born in the wrong body. We can help. So I beg of you, please reach out to us. Please listen to us. Please stop dismissing us as either transphobic or trans trenders or having internalized transphobia or never really being trans, because we have been there and we can help.